Welcome to English Stories Journey. Listen, relax, and grow your English with every story. Elena Whitmore lived in a small room on the third floor of a narrow London house. The street below was always busy. Carts rattled past, children shouted, and the smell of coal hung heavy in the air. Elena liked the noise. It reminded her that she was part of the living world, a world of errands and appointments, of tea and small, ordinary joys. She taught children to read and to count. She corrected their crooked letters and listened to their inventions with a smile. Her life was practical and quiet, and she liked it that way. Then the letter arrived. It came in cream paper, folded with care. The handwriting on the envelope was careful, old-fashioned, the kind of handwriting that seemed to belong to people who kept their houses tidy and their thoughts older than the day. Elena opened it on her little table and read the few lines twice. Madame, you are invited to take the position of governess to my house. Generous salary, comfortable lodgings, a quiet life in the Carpathian Mountains. I hope you will reply at once. Count Dracula. The name made her pause, but not from fear. It made her think of old books and distant places. She read the letter again and felt a curious lightness, as if the paper itself held a new path. Generous salary, comfortable lodgings, a quiet life in the mountains. The words called to the part of her that had always wanted to see beyond the gray of London.
She told herself it was an adventure. She told herself she could use the money. Her banker's account was thin, and her student loans were patient but constant. The idea of teaching in a quiet place, of walking among trees and listening to wind instead of wheels, had a strange appeal. Friends warned her. "A strange invitation," said Mrs. Clark, the owner of the boarding house, when Elena mentioned it over supper. "From a count in the mountains? Be careful, dear." Her voice lowered like a curtain between them. People in those places are different. They have old ways. Elena smiled politely. Perhaps, but a job is a job. The most interesting reaction came from Mr. Hale, the bookseller she had met at the library. He read the letter and did not laugh. Instead, his face changed into something like concern. "The name is old," he said slowly. "It carries history, but history is not always the same as danger. If you are to go, take care and carry common sense with you." She nodded. She went to the tailor and chose plain, warm clothes. She bought a thick cloak and a pair of gloves. She sent letters to warn no one. She preferred to surprise those who worried. Her heart thrummed with a special kind of fear that is not always unpleasant, the kind that happens before the stage curtain lifts. A week later, she stood on a small platform at the edge of town, watching the last of the coaches disappear into the cold mist. The carriage the Count had arranged was waiting, small, with a driver who did not raise his eyes. The road north was a ribbon through country she had only read about, hills folded into other hills, trees tight and dark like closed hands. As the city fell away, she watched wide fields and then narrower valleys until the sky itself seemed to change, taking on the strange light of places where people spoke with different accents and trusted fewer strangers. Her driver spoke little, and the silence had its own presence. Once, when he pointed to a small cluster of houses in a dip of the hills, a woman came out and crossed herself. The driver did not notice, but Elena did. In that small movement there was history and belief older than her neat education. It made her feel like a guest among sleeping things. When they reached the village, the sky was already low and heavy. The carriage stopped before a low building whose sign swung slowly in the wind, the Golden Stag. A warm glow came from the windows, and the sound of voices softened like a promise. Elena stepped from the carriage, pulling her cloak around her shoulders. The air tasted sharp and clean. A young boy ran past and shouted something in a language Elena did not know. Inside, the inn was one room with a low roof,
wooden benches, and a big fire. People looked up as she entered. Their gazes were quick and curious, like birds turning toward motion. Their clothes were simple, their faces weathered. A child with a tired face watched her while the adults spoke quietly among themselves. The innkeeper came forward, a man with strong hands and a mouth that had learned to be careful with words. "Welcome," he said. "You are far from home." "Yes," Elena answered. "I have an appointment at Castle Dracula." The room changed. A laughter that had been trying to live between the benches vanished like steam. The innkeeper's fingers tightened on his mug. A woman in the corner rose and crossed herself. Someone at a table spat quietly behind his hand. "Castle Dracula?" the innkeeper repeated slowly. "You are a stranger to our valley." Elena smiled and felt the smile do a small, nervous thing in her chest. "I have been offered a position there. I am to be governess." There was a murmur. The old woman who had crossed herself came closer. Her eyes were bright and more sharp than a young person's. She had the shuri look of someone who had spent life watching small dangers. "You would go to him?" she asked. Elena's answer came with an easy firmness. "Yes, I believe I should." The old woman reached into the pocket of her shawl and drew out a small object wrapped in thread. She pressed it into Elena's hand. A tiny silver cross on a leather cord, worn and warm as if it had been held for many years. "Keep this," the woman said. "It has watched many nights." Her voice was thin but strong. "The Count is a man of shadows. He has a house of stone and silence. Your heart is brave, child, but remember that some things do not like the daylight." Elena realized she was holding the cross tightly. People had told her strange stories of wolves and storms, but this felt different, like a small door closing against the dark. She thanked the woman and kept the cross near her throat even after she went to find a place to sleep. The next morning, the road was steeper and the trees grew taller. Mist hung low over the ground, and the sun was a pale coin through the branches. The carriage climbed, the driver's face a study in patience, while Elena watched the world change. Small houses disappeared and gave way to rocks and old stone fences. The air grew colder and smelled of soil, and the smell of old wood. At last, the path opened onto a wide valley. There, on the edge of a cliff, stood the castle. It rose like memory made into stone. Towers reached up, sharp as knives against the gray sky. Many windows were dark, but here and there a ribbon of light moved like a living thing. Vines clung to the walls. Flags, old and faded, hung limp from their poles. The great gate, iron and heavy, sat closed like a mouth waiting to speak. When the carriage came to a stop, Elena felt a weight in her chest. The driver tipped his hat and said little. Her luggage was taken from the carriage by a servant with slow, careful movements. The servant's face was pale, and his eyes had the soft look of people who had read too many long nights. "You have come far," he said. "Please follow me." He led her along a stone path. The castle's courtyard was wide and silent. On the walls, faces were carved into stone, old kings and women with folded hands. The path took them past statues half-eaten by time, and through an arched doorway into a corridor where torches burned with a blue and steady flame. Inside, the castle was colder than the outside. The sound from the courtyard fell away, and the walls here seemed to drink noise. They walked through long halls, past tapestries and armor, past shelves of things that no one touched anymore. Conversation seemed small here. The air itself held a kind of listening. At the end of a long corridor, they entered a great hall. Its ceiling was high and carved with shapes of leaves and stars. A fire lay in a great hearth, and above it, On a wall of stone hung a large framed painting. The frame was thick with dust and age, but the portrait itself had kept its color. It showed a woman in a red gown, pale and radiant, with hair like spun gold. She looked straight out at the room with eyes that were gentle and full of sorrow. Elena stopped without thinking. The woman in the painting had her face. For a breath, the world held as if listening. The servant before her bowed and stepped back. The silence folded like a hand. A voice came from the shadowed doorway. It was deep and calm, with a strange music that made the air feel colder where it passed. My home is not often warmed by guests from England. The man who spoke stepped into the light. He was tall and wore a coat of dark velvet that caught the torchlight. His skin was white as if he had never seen the sun. His hair was dark and assembled into a neat line at his neck. His hands were long and careful. When he moved, it was like the slow passage of a violin bow. He would not have been called handsome in the quick way of London men, but there was in his face a gravity that took the eye and a presence that suggested time had taught him many things. Count Dracula, the servant said, bowing from the doorway. The man's name seemed to taste like something old. Elena felt the sound in her body as much as in her ears.
Miss Whitmore, the Count said, and his voice wrapped around her name like a small and curious scarf. Welcome to my home. She curtsied, and the motion was suddenly small. Thank you, Count. Your letter found me. He moved nearer and looked at her with an interest that was not surprise and not coldness, but something like recognition. His dark eyes held hers a moment longer than those of a polite host. There was a softness in them, a slow sadness below control. You have traveled far, he said. You look tired. A little, Elena answered. She felt himself steady in a way she had not expected. The road was rough, but I am happy to serve. The work will offer me a quiet life. Quiet, he repeated, and the single word was both a promise and a warning. Yes, you will find quiet here. He glanced up at the portrait. You noticed our painting? She nodded before she could stop herself. She looks like me, she said. Her voice sounded thin. The Count's face changed with that little mention. He did not smile, yet his expression softened. She was my wife, he said. Long ago. She had a quiet face and a soul that liked the sun. His fingers brushed the frame as if in memory. Elena's hand went without thought to the silver cross at her throat. There was a flutter in her chest that felt too old for her years. I am honored to be here. He took a step closer, though not so close as to be familiar. We shall speak more tomorrow. For now, you would be wise to rest. Dinners are late in these parts. He offered his arm with the small ritual politeness of a gentleman. Elena accepted. His arm was cool beneath her hand, and that coolness ran up her wrist like a small river. For a moment she had an odd wish to tell him that she was not afraid. Instead, she said simply, Good night, Count. Good night, Miss Whitmore, he answered. As she turned to go, his eyes found hers again, not hungry, not cruel, but full of a longing that made the hall seem too narrow. Elena walked to her room with 1,000 thoughts trailing like small birds behind her. The portrait's painted eyes seemed to follow her steps. In the quiet, beneath the echo of her own soft breathing, something part of her felt recognized in a place of stone and silence. That night, in a bed that smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, Elena lay awake and thought of the Count's face, of the woman in the red gown, and of the small silver cross that had warmed to her touch. Outside, the wind made the castle's loose shutters sing, and somewhere, very far away, a bell marked the hour like a slow and patient hand. She did not know then what meaning the portrait held. She only knew that in the quiet of the halls, among paintings and whispers, something in the castle had noticed her, and something in her had answered. The mountains waited beyond the windows. The house of stone breathed in the chilled air. The journey had closed its first chapter.
Morning in the castle was quiet, too quiet. No birds sang, no servants walked the halls. Only the soft echo of Elena's steps followed her wherever she went. Her room was large and cold, with heavy curtains that blocked the sunlight. When she opened them, she found not a bright sky, but a thick white fog that wrapped the mountains like a shroud. Far below, the forest looked endless, black and secret. She stood there for a while, breathing the silence. It was beautiful, but lonely, as if the world had fallen asleep. Count Dracula had greeted her only once since her arrival. He had shown her the library, the music room, and the small schoolroom where she was to teach the children of a distant relative. Yet no children had come. The classroom stood empty, as if time itself had stopped waiting for her. Each morning she prepared her lessons, placed books on the table, and waited. And each morning, no one appeared. Still, she stayed. In the evenings, she would walk through the corridors, her candle trembling in the draught. Sometimes she felt the air shift behind her, as though someone passed by, but when she turned, she saw nothing. Once she caught her reflection in a mirror. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw another face behind hers, a woman with darker hair and sorrowful eyes. She blinked, and the image vanished, but her heart raced for a long time after. The mirrors, too, began to change. By candlelight, they no longer reflected her clearly. The glass darkened, like a pool of ink. When she mentioned it to the Count one evening, his expression did not change. "Perhaps," he said softly, "the mirrors remember more than we do." His words sent a shiver through her, though his tone was gentle, almost sad. That night, she joined him for supper in the grand dining hall. The table stretched endlessly, filled with silver dishes and goblets that sparkled in the firelight. Yet only two places were set, hers and his. "I hope the castle does not make you lonely, Miss Whitmore," he said, his deep voice smooth and distant. "It's very peaceful," she replied, "but I've not yet seen anyone else. No servants, no children." He smiled faintly. "The castle has few living souls now. Time has taken most away, yet their presence remains in a way." Elena hesitated. "Do you mean ghosts?" Dracula looked at her, and his eyes caught the light like dark wine. "Ghosts are nothing more than memories that refuse to die." A long silence followed. Outside, the wind howled through the stone arches. She asked quietly, "And what memories live here, Count?" He rose from his chair and walked toward the fire. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a voice that carried both pain and pride, he began.
"Long ago, before this castle fell into shadow, I was a man like any other. I loved a woman who was my heart, my light, my reason to fight. Her name was Mirena. She was accused of witchcraft by those who feared what they did not understand. They burned her, believing they saved their souls." His hands trembled slightly as he touched the mantle. "I came too late. The fire had already taken her. In that moment, something inside me broke, and something else was born. A hunger, a curse. The earth itself refused to take me." Elena listened, her breath shallow. Dracula turned toward her. "They said her soul would return, that love as strong as ours could not die." His gaze fixed on her face. "And now you stand before me." Her heart beat fast. "You think I am her?" "I know it," he said simply. "Your face, your voice, even your spirit, it is hers. The same fire that once loved me burns in your eyes." Elena wanted to speak, to deny, but she couldn't. His words wrapped around her like fog, soft, suffocating, beautiful.
After that night, the castle seemed to breathe with her. The walls sighed when she passed. The candle flames bent toward her, and every evening she found herself drawn to the same place, the portrait in the gallery. It hung at the end of a long corridor. The woman in it wore a crimson dress, her hands folded, her eyes full of quiet sorrow. The likeness was undeniable. Elena would stand before it for hours, feeling the woman's gaze upon her. Sometimes she thought the lips moved slightly, as if whispering her name. One night, she touched the frame, and the air turned cold. Behind her, she heard the soft rustle of a cloak. "You see it, too," came Dracula's voice. She turned, startled. He stood a few feet away, dressed in black, his pale face lit by candlelight. "It is she," he said quietly, "the one who was lost." Elena's voice trembled. "If she was truly your love, why do I feel as if she still lives in me?" Dracula's eyes softened. "Because she does." He stepped closer, his presence both terrifying and magnetic. "You do not remember it yet, but your soul knows mine. It has always known." She felt her pulse in her throat. "That cannot be true." He smiled sadly. "You will see. Love leaves a mark that time cannot erase."